you will enjoy today's session as well. I am Amira, the Virtual Education USA Advisor for Libya, and I'm joined today by my very dear colleague Hanadi from Education USA Qatar, and our guest speakers from Colorado State University, who will share tips and resources for students with disabilities at US universities. Make sure to prepare your questions, and we will answer all of them at the end of the session. So we will start with a brief introduction about our network, Education USA. Then we will turn it over to our guest speakers, and then we'll wrap it up with the Q&A. So who are we and how can we help you? Education USA is the US Department of State network, which means we are your official source if you are interested in pursuing your undergraduate or graduate studies in the United States. We are located everywhere. There are more than 430 international student advising centers in more than 170 countries and territories. The good thing about us is that we offer free, unbiased, accurate, and impartial information about anything you need to know to study at the United States. How can we help you? So we offer a lot of free services. Number one, we do public info sessions. So if you have like any topic that you would like to learn more about, you can suggest it to your advisor and we can have a session about that. We can have sessions about the 5 steps to study in the United States. We can have sessions about opportunities that we have at our centers like the Competitive College Club or the graduate study programs and so on and so forth. We also do some chat sessions with the university representatives, just like today's session, and that's a great opportunity for you to learn more, details about the programs at US institutions, about the scholarship opportunities or the financial aid opportunities, about how to apply to US institutions, and also we have some sessions about the visa process. We do some sessions with alumni. So if you are an alumni, if you are currently in the United States and you want to share your experience, make sure to reach out to your advisor and we can coordinate a session where we can have you. Number 3, we offer individual consultations. So if you are a student, if you are a parent, if you are a professor, and if you'd like to learn more details about the application process to study in the United States, make sure to book an appointment with the advisor of your country. So this is my email address if you are a student or a parent or a professor from Libya. And this is the email address of my colleague Hanadi if you are someone from Qatar. Last but not least, make sure to visit our official website, educationusa.state.gov, if you'd like to get more details about the 5 steps to study in the US, or if you are following us from a different country but you want to find your advising center. Also, if you would like to explore the financial aid opportunities offered by different US universities, or even to check the events that are taking place at different Education USA centers. Again, welcome everyone. Make sure to type any questions you have. We will answer all of them at the end of the session. Now we're going to turn it over to our guest speakers. Enjoy today's session. It is very beneficial. It is very important. Make sure to share it with your friends. And also we will upload it on our YouTube channel and you can find it again on our Facebook pages. Over to you, Jessica.
All right, thank you, Amira. All right, give me 1 sec. Let me make sure I can get my screen shared correctly. All right, is that showing up for everyone? Okay, let me. Okay, here we are. All righty. Well, first off, thank you so much for spending time with me today to discuss about disabled students in higher education and how you can be come over here and be a part of higher education and ensure that you're having an experience that's going to be beneficial for you, that will help you in your future endeavors in your career. So my name is Justin Dove. I use he and his pronouns. I'm the director of the Student Disability Center at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you've ever heard of Denver, Colorado, I'm about 1 hour north of Denver. So if you ever look that up, you'll see where we are. So In terms of what we are going to discuss today, so the agenda today is to go through first about some laws that's establishing protections for you as a student here in the States if you decide to come. And then also we'll talk about applying to colleges and universities and that process and how that might work. Then of course, disability services. So that's an area that you'll want to connect with when you come to a university or college. And then we'll talk about the accommodations process, philosophy surrounding that process, and then resources, and of course, any questions you might have at the end of this session, okay? All righty. So first off, some laws establishing protections here in the States. So we have what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And basically what that is civil rights legislation that prohibits any discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have an equal opportunity as non-disabled people. And so you might be confused because you say, well, it says Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm not an American. This legislation protects you as someone who's coming to the States and participating in our educational processes. So this does apply to you and protects you. And then we also have what's called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was back in 1973, that long ago. But what it is that any institution that receives any federal funding from the government, so any money from the government, we're not allowed to discriminate against people with disabilities. And so if you're receiving federal funding, you're required to provide accommodations and to ensure access for disabled people. And so these are the two main laws that protect you when you come to the university in the United States to ensure that you're getting the experience that you're supposed to be getting. So when you're looking to apply to colleges and universities, some tips and ideas for you. First off, when you go to any college website, search for what's called the admissions office. The admissions office is the one that's going to work with you to see about how you can apply, anything that's going to tell you about minimum requirements, things of that sort. When you're looking for colleges or universities, I want to make sure that you're focusing on what is it that you're wanting to do? What's the program that you're wanting to get into? What's the job that you want? That's how I want you to go about selecting a university. Sometimes there's a myth that because of a certain disability that you have, that you can only go to certain colleges or universities. That's not the case. We want you to select a school or program that's going to fit the needs that you have for your future endeavors, because basically every college and university in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 applies to you. So we are required to accommodate you when you come to the States, okay? So make sure you're kind of selecting your program based on what you want. Another tip too, when you're coming to college, university, consider the environment of campus as well as the community. So there's different things to think about. First off, this might sound silly, but think about the weather environment. I live in Colorado where it's going to snow, lots and lots of snow. And so if you want to have that experience, this is probably a cool place to come to. But if you're like, I don't want any cold weather, Colorado may not be the place for you to come. And then also consider maybe transportation needs. So if you're going to be over here and not really have your own transportation, it's good to maybe search about what transportation is on campus. Do we have our own buses or our own shuttles? Does the community that you're living in provide public transportation? Another great place to, which will definitely get connected when you're here at a college or university, is the International Student Services area, because I bet you they're going to have some information on how you can navigate and get around your community. And then another thing that I think is really important for you to take a look at is just seeing about the university's philosophy when it comes to diversity and inclusion. That's a big thing right now, that we're really wanting to have a diverse student population and have diverse experiences. And so just check it out to make sure that it seems like it's going to be welcoming to you. Every campus should be that way, but maybe you want to just kind of do some research and make sure that your values kind of aligns with the values at the university that you're wanting to attend. Another thing too, check out the Disability Services Office in your research. What's really important to know is that understanding their needs for when you're coming to their college or university. And so they may have certain requirements for documentation, which I'll go over here in a little bit. Look at their philosophy. Some search terms that I want you to look for when you're looking at a disability services website. See if they talk about the universal design. See if they talk about the social model of disability over the medical model of disability. And you may not know what that is, but I'll go over that here in a little bit. But those are some search terms that I want you to look for when you're looking at those websites. And then, of course, check out campus resources available to you. We'll go over some of those as well. There's a ton of resources on campuses that are for you to use. The biggest thing, though, is that no one's really outreaching to you. You have to be the one to reach out to them. You have to be the one to go seek out that support, seek out those resources. We'll talk about here in a little bit, but kind of see what those resources are on campus to see if that might be able to provide you greater support for when you're coming to the States for your college experience. See what's available to you to see what might work for you. All right, so what we have pictured here, this is an example of an admissions website. So this is our Colorado State front page for our admissions website. So you have 3 students here sitting in the grass, just kind of looking like they're enjoying what they're doing, sitting outside enjoying the Colorado weather. But some pretty common features that you're going to see at any college or university that you're looking at is they're gonna probably offer you an option to see like a virtual tour of campus to see what it looks like. They're gonna also kind of show you different aspects of college life. And so here at Colorado State, we actually have a chat feature that you can actually go in and start asking questions, and then someone's going to respond to you potentially and get you connected either virtually or maybe even try to give you a phone call or something. We're not going to be worried about making international phone calls or things of that sort. So we may pick up the phone or maybe do an internet call with you if you would want that. So, okay. Continuing on with applying to colleges and universities. So when you apply, there's going to be certain minimum admittance requirements, okay? So they're going to kind of outline that on your website. They probably will have a specific person or area that's going to work with international students. Because here in the States, we have what's called the ACT or SAT sometimes, where we have to take a test to help us kind of help with the admittance process. And it may be different for international students, and some schools aren't taking those tests. So it's kind of good to take a look at what those requirements would be. Even if you're seeing a university that maybe they have some minimum requirements and you're not sure if you're going to meet those, still go and talk to that university if you're interested, because sometimes they can look at maybe doing what's called a conditional admittance. What that would mean is that, you know, you may not meet those minimum requirements completely, but we're going to have you start maybe on a temporary or probationary period to see if you're able to continue on in the program, okay? So if you're still interested in college, university, and you're not sure if you meet those minimum requirements, still connect with them and see if there's a possibility that you can still be potentially admitted there. And some other things to know when it comes to applying at a college or university is that they may require like a personal statement or an essay, or maybe even a little bit of a paper. And so like here at Colorado State, they want you to write a personal statement. And sometimes it might be a topic that they give you that they want you to write about, or they leave it open for you to write. And the whole point of this personal statement or essay is that the goal is to get to know you. They want to know you better. They want to know you beyond just your academics. They want to know your experiences. They want to know what you bring to the environment at Colorado State University. So if you ever see something that talks about writing a statement, take your time in writing that statement and have someone proofread that for you. Because also what they may be looking for is how you're able to demonstrate how you organize your thoughts, or how you write. And the biggest thing is just be authentic, be genuine, tell your story about who you are. We are very interested in that because what we really believe, especially here at Colorado State, you know, obviously learning happens in the classroom, but learning just doesn't happen in the classroom. Learning happens when you interact with peers, when you interact with others who have different backgrounds and experiences and religions and ethnicities than you. And so we're really looking to diversify our population and diversify the experience that everyone has here at Colorado State. And so this is a time to tell who you are and to be proud of who you are. And so really disclose who you are in that essay and let your personal story shine. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is finding a disability services department at a college or university. So on the screen here, you have a screenshot of what it looks like on our front page. It says, "Welcome to the Student Disability Center." And so what's kind of maybe a little difficult sometimes when you're trying to do your research is that we're not all named the same office name, okay? So sometimes we're called the Student Disability Center, or the Disability Resource Center, or the Access Office, or Disability Support Services. There's all sorts of different names. And so what's going to be better for you to do is when you go to that university's homepage, is to do some different search terms. So search for disability, search for ability, access, accessibility or accommodations. What's probably going to be pretty common is that you might hop on a page that talks about disability accommodations, but it might be for employees. So definitely search for the one that's for students, okay? So those are just some different search terms that you will want to use to try to find a disability services office to see who you need to connect with about potential accommodations when you come over to the United States for your college experience. And let me tell you in terms of what our purpose is as a disability services office and what we do in our processes. So first off, of course, we meet with disabled students to determine what's called reasonable accommodations for equal access. And I keep saying equal access, and you might wonder what that means. Sometimes students worry, or people worry that, like, if I have an accommodation, it gives me an advantage over somebody else who doesn't have that accommodation. And so I want to help dispel that myth that when you're coming to seek accommodations for a disability on a college campus, the goal is to provide you equal access. What that means is that we want to give you an equal playing field as your non-disabled peers, because if we're being truly honest about the college experience, college experiences weren't designed to be inclusive of people with disabilities. So that's why we have accommodations to help bring down those barriers so that you have that equal opportunity to participate. When it comes to accommodations, you might just be thinking, oh, it's just my academics. That's not the case. So here at Colorado State, we have residence halls and housing on campus. And so you may come over to Colorado State and go, well, I might need a wheelchair accessible bathroom, or I might need a flashing doorbell to make sure that I can understand if a fire's going on and I can't hear it, things of that sort. And so we'll look at accommodations for housing and as well as your activities. So if you're wanting to participate in an activity that's happening on campus, but you're not sure you're able to fully participate because of a disability related barrier, we can talk about that and we can work with that department to see about providing an accommodation that allows you to participate fully in that activity. So of course, we advise students on how to implement their accommodations and how to discuss that with instructors, and I'll provide more context here in a little bit. And then we also collaborate and provide support to faculty, instructors, and staff. So sometimes when we come up with accommodations, your instructor might not be sure on how to implement that. And so that's what we're here for in our office, to help kind of provide that support and say, hey, here's how you might want to implement this accommodation, or we may need to look at a different accommodation to ensure that you have that access in their course. And then, of course, we also provide training and education to faculty, staff, and students to create a more inclusive campus for people with disabilities. So what you're going through right now when you go through our accommodations process, it's a very reactive kind of thing, right? Where you're disclosing to us and then we provide accommodations and your instructor implements those, or whoever is on campus. But our goal really is that we're trying to create a campus culture that hopefully we don't have to worry so much about accommodations. What we're trying to say is that, if you're, for example, deaf or hard of hearing, maybe you need captioning on a video. Well, should we really have to wait for you to come request that? Or should we just always provide that on all our videos? So we're trying to do things to educate campus, to do things proactively, so that when you show up to a college campus, or you show up to a classroom or to an activity, that we've already thought about you and you don't have to request anything. You can just show up like everyone else and participate and enjoy the class or activity. All right, so let me tell you about the accommodations process and how you would be able to potentially get accommodations at a college campus. So the first step is typically contacting the office, and usually there's a form online. There may be a paper form, but lots of times we're trying to move stuff online now. And so you'll fill out that form online. It's probably going to ask you some basic information about who you are, where you're from, what program you might be going into. And it's okay if you haven't chosen a program, okay? You're allowed to be undecided when it comes to coming to a college or university. And then also it's going to ask you some history about your disability and maybe some accommodations that you're requesting. So one thing I always like to point out is if you work with a doctor or a medical professional in your home country there, that you see if they can provide you some medical documentation that talks about your disability and talks about any barriers that you might live with related to that disability. Here at Colorado State, we really like to hear from you. You'll participate in what's called the interactive process, which is really a fancy way of saying we want to chat with you, because we believe that, who better the expert of the person's disability than the person living with the disability. So we want to hear from you about what's your experience, what's your day-to-day interactions, how does that work related to your disability? But bring that medical documentation, because some universities are really reliant on having that medical documentation to confirm your disability and the barriers that you live with. So it's always good to kind of get that gathered before you come over to the States when you have your college experience. You have that medical documentation, and then of course, we're gonna have you meet with an access advisor or an access specialist to participate in that conversation with them to understand your accommodation needs. When we have that discussion, any reasonable accommodations and or referrals will be determined. So we may determine some accommodations, but we may also refer you to other resources on campus that can help provide you greater support and access. So for example, here at Colorado State, we actually have a whole unit called the Assistive Technology Resource Center that has technology that helps provide greater access for people with disabilities. And so if we see an opportunity that you might need to communicate with them to see if there's any technology that can help you, we'll do a referral to them and they'll work with you to see if there's any technology that can help you while you're here at Colorado State. When it comes to the accommodations and what's determined, your accommodation specialist is going to provide what's called an accommodation memo or an accommodation letter. And that letter is going to explain, hey, these are, the students' accommodations. But one thing to know when it comes to an accommodation letter, it does not disclose your disability information, just your accommodations. And so here at the Student Disability Center at Colorado State, we want you to be prideful about your disability. We think disability is a part of your identity, and we want you to be proud and out with that. And so we hope that you know that's our philosophy here, and that we want you to share about your disability. We want you to share who you are. But then we also know some students, they're not there. They go, I live with this disability, but I don't want people to know about it. It's my business and no one needs to know. That's totally fine too. So what happens is that when we provide that accommodation letter to your instructor, it just talks about your accommodations, not your disability, and your instructor shouldn't be asking you about your disability, okay? So we wanna make sure that you're comfortable with what's happening, but we do hope you are at a point that you feel like you can and want to share that. And then what's gonna happen is that either you or the office is gonna provide the instructor the accommodation letter, and then have a thorough conversation about what that means in their class. And so your accommodation specialist will help guide you on how to have this conversation. But sometimes, like for example, maybe you get extended time on a test. So we call it like time and a half, where you get one and a half times more than your non-disabled peers to take a test. And so you may have a conversation with your instructor to say, hey, are you going to provide me this extended time, or do I need to go to the Student Disability Center to take my exam? So sometimes instructors aren't able to provide the extra time because they're teaching another class right after yours. And so they'll have you take it at our office to make sure that you get the extra time on the test. So that's just an example of what you would discuss with your instructor to make sure that you know how to get your accommodations implemented so that you can fully participate in the class. Okay. So let's talk about this interactive process and this chat with the accommodation specialist. So it can be a little daunting. It can be a little intimidating, because we're basically going to be coming to you, asking you some questions about your disability. And I want you to know that, we're not trying to be intrusive in any way. We're just trying to fully understand your experience so that we can make sure we have the right accommodations in place when you're at the college experience. So some things that we're going to talk to you about is just, first off, telling us more about who you are. Why are you here at Colorado State? Why are you seeking, is there a certain program that you're seeking? Because you'd be surprised on the emails we get about practicum opportunities, scholarship opportunities, internships that might be related to you or your program. And so if we have notes about that and it triggers my memory, I'll forward you an email and say, hey, this opportunity's come up. I want to make sure that you know about it so that you can participate. We want to know about your disability or any diagnoses that you live with, and understanding, how does this affect your daily living? When you're kind of trying to do just getting up and going to class, when you're trying to shower, when you're trying to go to class and do coursework, how would this affect you? Do you take any medications? What do they do? And we're not trying to get the name of the medication or anything of that sort, but sometimes we understand that medications create some side effects that can be sometimes hard to work with. And so we'll actually accommodate some of those side effects too, if we recognize that there might be something that we can bring accommodation to help bring down those barriers. And then, of course, we'll talk about housing. And so if you are coming to a college campus and they require you to live on campus, we have all sorts of different styles of housing. So you might be in a room with a roommate and you share a bathroom with two other people on the other side of you. Or you might have a roommate and you share a big community style bathroom where there's 10 separate shower stalls and 10 separate toilets, things of that sort. And so depending on your needs, you might go, I don't know that I can have a roommate. I might need to have a private room, or might need to have a private bathroom that I can do my care in, if I have to have a wheelchair accessible bathroom or something like that. And so that's what we're going to talk to you about, to make sure that if you're going to come to Colorado State and live on campus, that your housing is appropriate for you and that you can have the full benefit of living on campus as well. What we'll also do is when we talk to you about your experience and your disability, is we're going to ask you some little hypotheticals. So for example, a classroom situation. So I might say, hey, I'm your instructor and you're in class and you're just listening to me lecture and you're taking notes. Can you talk to me about how you go about that? Do you experience any barriers when you're just trying to sit in class, listen, and take notes? We're going to ask you about maybe how do you study and prepare for class? I always like to ask, are you an audio learner? Are you a visual learner? That could be helpful information. We're going to ask you about taking an exam. And so exams here, we can have a different array of types of exams. So you might be taking like a 50-question multiple choice test, or you might be taking a test where it's 3 essay questions, or it could be just one question and you have an hour to write about that one question. And so we're going to ask you about those things, about how do you take an exam? When you're taking an exam, does it take you longer than your non-disabled peers? What might be the reason for that? And we're going to try to address those situations through accommodation. And of course, if you use any sort of technology, that's good for us to know, because it might help us in terms of your accommodations, in terms of preparing your instructor, so that if you're having to have a laptop up in class or you have a certain piece of technology, that your instructor doesn't question you on why you have that. We can put it on your accommodation letter so that they know that they can expect you to have that in their class. Okay. So accommodations determined. So you might be wondering, like, okay, so I live with this disability, what accommodations can I get? And that's a hard question to answer, because what we really try to do is tailor your accommodations to your needs. We could have 2 people living with the same diagnosis, but have completely different needs when it comes to accommodations. So we don't have a laundry list of things that, if you have this disability, here are the accommodations you get. That's why we talk to you, to make sure that we are providing accommodations that are appropriate for you. One thing to note too, when you meet with a disability services office and their accommodation specialists, when you meet with them that first time, they're going to determine some, accommodations from the get-go, but it doesn't mean that that has to be it. So maybe these are the ones that we start with, but then you start doing your classwork and things, and you realize that you're running into barriers that you weren't expecting or that we didn't talk about. So you're absolutely allowed to come request new accommodations. You're allowed to revisit with your accommodation specialist to discuss that, hey, I'm running into this concern or issues, or any way that we might have other accommodations that could be helpful here. And so in terms of, we do have common accommodations that do occur on campus. So first off, extended time on exams and quizzes is typical. And so, an example I can think of is that maybe if you're a blind student and you're having to use technology and things to help navigate your test or something, or you might have someone who has to read your test to you, that's going to take longer. And so we're going to make sure that you have extra time to do that. Sometimes when you come, depending on the college or university that you go to, you may be in a class that's only 10, 15, 20 people, and you may be in a classroom that has 500 people in it. And so sometimes taking an exam in an environment that has 100, 200, 300 people can be kind of hard if you have like a distraction related disability or something like that. And so we can offer maybe a smaller environment for your exams and quizzes. We can also do note-taking assistance as a common one, where maybe it's technology that helps you take notes. As I mentioned with housing before, we might have to look at a private room or an accessible room in some fashion. Accessible site kind of means like when you go to a building on campus, making sure that, if you're a wheelchair user or you live with a mobility disability, that you're able to access the classroom. Because if you look at many colleges and universities, lots of these were built a long time ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And so when you think about the history, they didn't think about disability then. And so some of these buildings were built with lots of stairs and things. And so if we're in a building that's not going to be accessible for someone who has a mobility disability, we can actually move that classroom to another building to make sure that you can get that access. And then alternative format for textbooks, what that means is that the traditional textbook that's like a paper textbook, if that's not going to work for you, maybe, if you're blind and you use Braille or you need to have it read to you, we can convert that book into a digital format to make sure that you can access that textbook that would normally be paper. So that's just one example of what we can do in terms of textbooks and accommodations related to that. Okay. One thing I want to talk about too. So we talked about the laws that protect you when you come to the States as a person with a disability. So I'd love to think that hopefully you come to a college university and you run into no issues with an instructor or anyone on campus about your accommodations or accommodating you or including you. But you may run into somebody who doesn't want to provide you accommodations, or maybe they're kind of treating you differently because you're a disabled student than your non-disabled peers. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's good for you to know in case that happens that you do have rights to address that situation. So for example, if you feel like you're not getting your accommodations, first thing to do is talk to your accommodation specialist at the Disability Services Office and say, hey, this instructor is not providing me my extra time on my test, and I don't know why they're not doing that. So that way they can try to address it. And if they're still not providing an accommodation to you, you're allowed to file a complaint at the university to address the situation. And so it's not just disability. It could be related to your race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, etc. So do you know that you have that on campus to help resolve the issue if you feel like you're being discriminated against because of any of those categories? And I know that a worry might be, well, if I go tell my instructor or a staff member on campus, they're going to retaliate against me. And that's a legitimate worry, but you shouldn't expect to have retaliation. They are not allowed to retaliate because you filed a complaint. However, if you do experience retaliation, what I always say is document it. So if you have an email, or if you just wanted to write down, hey, on this date and time, this instructor told me in class blank. So that way you can take that back to the person you filed that complaint to and say, I'm now experiencing retaliation related to that complaint, okay? Because you shouldn't have to experience any of that, okay? Kind of like a disability services office, the office that you go to will probably have different names for it. So if you ever need to search for an office of that sort that you need that support, the terms you'll want to look for are equity and compliance, equal opportunity, discrimination, or ADA coordinator. Those are the search terms you'll want to use to try to find that officer who can help you. Also, when you get that accommodation letter, it should more than likely put in there different resources that you can use to help address any sort of concerns or issues that you might have. Okay. I think it's important for you to understand the philosophy typically of a disability services office, so that you know what you're responsible for when you come to the States for your college experience. And so I want to talk about self-advocacy and self-determinism, and then universal inclusive design and medical model and social model of disability. And you're probably like, what in the world does that all mean? So let me talk about that here. So self-advocacy and self-determinism. So as I told you before, your accommodation letter says nothing about your disability, just your accommodations. And the reason for that is that we want you in control of your story, okay? And we want you to be able to feel comfortable to share as little or as much about your story that you want. But with that ability to do that, that means greater responsibility on you. So when we create that accommodation letter for you, whether you provide that to your instructor or we provide it, you're expected to advocate for your accommodations. So if your instructor is not providing you the accommodations, you need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, I want to make sure that I get my accommodations. Is everything good to go? Are we okay? Because basically, if you don't speak up, we don't know if anything's going wrong. So because we have to be very honest with you in terms of what we are experiencing here in the States right now, is that we're having lots of people within universities who are leaving or seeking different job opportunities. And so we may be in a situation where we don't have a lot of staff to be available immediately for you. And so if we don't hear from you, we're just kind of thinking everything's good to go. So if everything's not good, that's when you want to contact your accommodation specialist immediately and say, hey, I'm having some concerns. But you kind of have to be the one to speak up. And when it comes to resources, as I said earlier, they're there for you on campus to use. And lots of them are free, but when we say they're free, if you look at your student bill, chances are you probably paid for it in the student fee. So you might as well use it and get your money's worth. But once again, lots of resources aren't going to come to you. They're there for you to use. You have to be one to request to use them. You have to be the one to show up to that resource to use it. So it's just more responsibility on you. And you just got to be a good advocate of yourself to say what you need so you can get the support that you need. And of course, we want you to be a good advocate, but then also we're going to advocate for you too. And the responsibility for ensuring you have a good experience is not just on you, it's not just on us, but it's also your instructor, it's also the staff members on campus. It's a shared responsibility to ensure that you have the experience you deserve when you come to the States for your college experience. The other thing too that we like to talk about, when I told you earlier to search for Disability Services website and search for the term universal design or inclusive design, this is a philosophy that we really preach here at Colorado State to try to, as I spoke about earlier, to create an environment that's already inclusive of you so that you don't have to request so many different accommodations to get the same experience. And so universal design is a design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. And so there's a picture here on the slide where you'll have stairs, and then you have a ramp that zigzags between those stairs. And why I like this picture is that you see people who are using the stairs that can use the stairs, but if you're someone who has a mobility disability or you use a wheelchair, things of that sort, you go the same route as your non-disabled peers, and you go to the same entrance. And why I think this is important is that we have buildings on campus that are ADA compliant, but if you're a wheelchair user, you might have to go to a completely separate entrance than somebody else who gets to go through the main entrance. And so that might be compliant, but that's not inclusive. And so what we're trying to do is teach that, when we think about design, can we think about all the users who could potentially use it? And so we're talking about disability today, but think about someone who might be, who has a baby in a baby stroller. Think about someone who might be delivering a package to you. And so when they're have that baby stroller or carrying that package, do they want to go up all these stairs or do they want to use a ramp as well? So it actually, good design not only helps disabled people, but it helps people who are not disabled in accomplishing the things that they need to do. And so we also talk about this when it comes to the classroom environment. So we have accommodations to help address any disability related barriers, but let's understand, like I said earlier, I'm very much a visual learner, but someone else might be an audio learner. So why can't we teach a class in a way that addresses both learning styles? How do we assess learning to make sure that we're addressing someone who maybe is not a good test taker, but they're really good at doing projects or really good at writing papers? That's what we're trying to preach, to really incorporate people in the education experience, that their learning style is appreciated, because obviously the whole goal is for you to learn as much as you can to prepare you for your next chapter in life. And so we want to make sure that you're not being disadvantaged just because you have a different way of learning than somebody else. Okay. The one thing I definitely want to talk about is the college experience when it comes to being here at the States and having the experience that you want. I want to make sure that you know that you have every right to access the college experience, every activity, as anybody else, okay? Sometimes we have students come over and they're like, well, I live with this disability, that means I can't do blank. No, you have every right to every experience that we have at a college or university. I have an example of where a student who, an international student from Russia who was blind, and she tried to go on a camping trip and was told no because she was blind. And that should not have happened. And we addressed that situation. So, like, once again, we have the ADA in section 504 that says you have every right to any experience on a college campus. And so we honor that. And so some things that you may see that you want to get involved in, some things to do is, first, we have classes. Residence life will have different things that you can do when you live on campus. Student activities, if you play sports, they'll have different sports opportunities, and they may even have adaptive sports as well. Lots of colleges and universities might have a sponsored spring break trip. So in the spring semester, you'll have a week off. And so sometimes they'll have a sponsored spring break trip or a service learning trip where you do community service somewhere. We have fraternity and sorority life. We have obviously college athletics. And then you also working on campus. There may be some different things you have to do being an international student to work on campus, but that's an opportunity that you can do as well. And then we also typically have student government on campus. And so you might have an opportunity to be a senator who represents a student organization when it comes to decisions for student funding on campus. You have all those different opportunities and you have every right to those. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise, okay? And as we have a picture here of our Colorado State Marching Band, so another activity that you can definitely look at and watch the football games and things. So, all right. Some other things too. So campus and community resources that are typical that are good for you to know. So first of campus resources, of course, we have our Disability Services Office, and then definitely connecting with your International Student Services Office so they can assist you on how you can get over to your college or university and access the resources that they have for you to have a smooth transition. Many colleges and universities might have a multicultural resource center, or here at Colorado State, we actually have multiple centers that address different identities. All sorts of different student affairs and organizations will typically have tutoring or study skills that are offered. A health center might be offered on campus. So here at Colorado State, we have our own health center for students. We also have counseling for mental health. So if you ever feel like you need to go to a counselor, many universities will have a counseling center. We talked about intramural and adaptive sports. And then assistive technology. So I talked to you about the assistive technology resource center that we have here at Colorado State. We're kind of unique that we have our own center that does that. But usually on a college campus, your disability services area might have something within their area that's related to assistive technology to help. And then, like I said, student organizations and things that's involved in housing, you might have opportunities there. Also, we have the campus resources, but then also it's good for you to know the resources that are available to you in your community that you're moving into. So here in Fort Collins, Colorado, we have a Center for Independent Living. And so we have a little screenshot here of their front page called Disabled Resource Services, where their whole goal is to make sure that disabled people in Colorado at Fort Collins are supported and they're able to live and work and do things independently. And so that's a resource that you can use. There may be disability specific organizations. And then also the city that you're going to reside in will probably have their own city government sort of resources or service boards or things of that sort. So for example, one of our accommodation specialists, he serves on our disability advisory board for the city of Fort Collins. So he actually has some input in ways that he's trying to influence Fort Collins to be a more inclusive place for people with disabilities. So if you're looking for community resources, those are some search terms that you'll want to look for to see what's offered in your community. All right, and some other resources that are very helpful for you as well. So the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, their whole goal is to increase the participation of disabled students and others in international exchange. So it's not just education, it could be volunteering, it could be all sorts of different things. And so it's an exchange between the United States and other countries and vice versa. And they have all sorts of free resources that you can use on there. And then another resource that really is very helpful is Mobility International. They have a resource library about like different tip sheets and best practices, maybe about if you're a wheelchair user, here's what you need to take into account when you're coming over to the States, or if you're deaf, or if you're blind, or live with a certain disability, here's some things to consider when you're coming over to the States. They'll have personal stories on there that talks about others who have already done this and can give you some tips. Give you some prep in terms of studying in the United States, and then financial options as well. I know a big typical question would be, hey, are there scholarships for people with disabilities? Or just for me when I come to your university? Every college and university will have their own way of doing scholarships. And so, for example, here at Colorado State, we do have a scholarship for disabled students. but you already have to be admitted and be here for a year to get that. But my previous institution had a scholarship that was for any incoming freshman that was coming to our university. So you just kind of have to do some searching and exploring at your university or college website to see what different scholarships are available. They have a scholarships page. I know some universities, so for example, here at our university, when you do a scholarship application, it'll automatically it'll automatically enter you for different scholarship opportunities. So you just kind of have to explore that to see what opportunities that they would offer for you. If you're seeking a certain program, maybe you want to be in the engineering program, go to their website and search for scholarships within engineering, because they may have some department specific scholarships that you can participate in that doesn't have anything to do with your disability status. It's just because you're a student interested in their area. So there's just some tips that you might want to look at when it looks at financial options, because we know that higher education is not cheap here in the States. And so I can understand that you want to know more about how to finance that so you can get over here and not have a lot of debt or anything like that. So, okay. So I thought I went through that really quick, but hopefully that was good information for you. And then, of course, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. So.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you very much for the informative presentation. Actually, I will start with the questions that we received on our pages. The first question that we received, do you recommend students to mention their disability in their personal statement or essay? Do you think that the admission officer would think that they are seeking, maybe seeking sympathy, or if they mention their disability that the university will not consider them? What do you think?
That's a really great question. It kind of it depends on your comfortability. Because let me tell you what's supposed to happen. We are not supposed to discriminate at all based on any sort of disability, okay, in the admissions process. And so that's why I want you to look at those admittance requirements to make sure that, see if you meet those minimum requirements, because disabled or not, if you meet those minimum requirements, you should be admitted. It depends on how comfortable you are to talk about your disability. For my inclinations, I would love for you to talk about that, because also, as I kind of said earlier, is that universities are really big now on diversity, and diversity is not just a different race or ethnicity, it's also your gender identity, it's also disability, it's also your sexual orientation, things like that. And so I would love for you to write about that, but I can't promise or guarantee. I'm not at every college university to know what their mindset is about disability inclusion on their campus. And so I would hope that they wouldn't discriminate because you wrote something about your disability in your statement. But I guess I'd also say if they were to if they were to discriminate against you because you wrote something like that in there, I don't know that's the university for you to go to, right? We're not going to go to a place that's going to be more inclusive of you. And so I lean on the side of you being authentic and being who you are and writing about who you are and be proud of who you are. And if they don't accept that, that's their loss, not yours.
Wow, yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that you mentioned the financial aid, but this is a recurrent question. So what about financial aid for students with disability? If you could please repeat that.
Yeah. So I'm not a financial aid expert on how that all works when it comes to international students and disability and financial aid. One thing to do is definitely connect with your International Student Services office. They will probably have a lot better information about what the financial requirements would be, if there's a certain amount of money that's needed, or if there's certain programs they can offer. Definitely do a search on the university's website about scholarships. If you don't see anything pop up right away about scholarships, search under financial aid. Financial aid will outline some different processes and things regarding to payment and coming to campus, and they may have a tab about scholarships. And so definitely just explore what they offer in terms of scholarships. When you go to Disability Services website, do a search to search scholarship on that website to see if they may offer something. And as I said earlier, may go to the department that you might be interested in, see if they offer scholarships there. And then also, a tip that I learned is that if you have any sort of favorite products that you use, if you use a certain shampoo or you like a certain food or something like that, you'd be surprised on what businesses and companies offer scholarships. And so definitely look at those things and apply for those too. Apply for them. The worst that can happen is they say no. But if they say yes, then you have more money to help fund your experience here in the States. But I think really connecting with International Student Services and connecting with your financial aid office on a campus, that's going to give you the best path and guidance on what you need to do, what costs would be, and if there's any financial assistance to help you come over to the States. And then also using that Mobility International page, they really do offer some really good resources there.
Okay. I have a question. There's a student is asking, do I need to apply for accommodations each semester for for classes?
That's a great question. Here's what I think typically would happen. So here, I'll just speak for at least for Colorado State. When you meet with an accommodation specialist and determine those accommodations, for the most part, those are usually ongoing each semester that you're here. What we ask you to do for our office is that each semester, we have a form on our website that you fill out that says, I want to request my accommodation letters for this semester. And so that's all you have to do for us to get your accommodations for that semester. Now you may say, okay, it's a new semester, and you may go, I may need to request a different accommodation. You're always welcome to go back on our calendar to do that. I do know some colleges and universities may say, hey, in order to get your accommodations for next semester, we just need to have a quick check-in meeting or a quick check-in email, something like that. So I can't speak for all that it's going to be modeled like we do here at Colorado State, but typically, if you already have it for one semester, it's probably going to continue for your future semesters at whatever college or university that you're at.
Yeah. I have another question. How do sign language interpreters work in classes with a deaf student?
A good question. So every college university should be offering sign language interpreting, whether that is having someone on staff, or we have sign language agencies that will provide interpreters for classrooms. And so what will typically happen is that wherever you decide to sit in a classroom, that interpreter will be in the front of the class to be visible for you to see that interpreter while you're doing coursework. I know an option could be virtual or remote interpreting. So you might have a computer that has an interpreter going on there. But I know typically what we've seen with our deaf students is that they don't usually like the virtual or remote interpreting. They usually like the in-person interpreting there. And so that's what we at least do here at Colorado State, is to have an in-person interpreter at the front of your class. And I also appreciate you bringing up your interpreting, because I don't want you to think that's just for your classroom. Maybe you need to go have a conversation with your instructor, or maybe you need to go to your academic advisor and talk about your classes. You can request that you have an interpreter join you on those meetings. That's within your rights to do, to make sure that you get the access you need so that you're able to communicate the way you need to communicate to understand what's going on. So.
Yeah, that's great. Another question from another student: can my parents be involved in the process and come with me to the US?
Sure. That's a good question as well. When it comes to the student experience at a university, know that when it comes to decisions about you, it comes to decisions about your classwork, about your accommodations, the university is going to look to you to be the voice to do that, okay? We want it to be a student-driven decision because basically we have different laws here in the States. We have a law called FERPA, and FERPA, what it says is that we're trying to protect you and your information, and that you're the adult here and you're the one that's responsible for your education. So we want to hear from you. So for example, we'll talk about coming to do accommodations with us. We're going to look to you to talk about your disability and talk about your needs and things. But we know parents and family members have also been living with you. They know maybe about your disability and things, and they may be able to offer some additional context or information that's helpful. And so they can be a part of that meeting, but know that we're going to come to you and say, does that sound right to you? Is this an accommodation that you want? Does this make sense to you? We're going to look to you to make that decision. We're going to look to you to provide that confirmation and that affirmation to make that decision. When it comes to a classroom experience, your instructors aren't really going to want to hear from your family members. They're going to want to hear from you. So that's once again where I'm going to that self-advocacy piece. It's kind of part of the development of you in terms of being independent and being an independent learner and thinker. They want to hear from you, not your parents. We want your parents to be there as part of the team. We want them to be there as your support, but they can't do it for you. You have to be the one to do it. So that's just something to keep in mind. So you may go to an advising meeting for your classes. Your advisor may say it's just you. They may not want parents there. For our purposes, we don't mind to have parents at your meetings there with you, but we just want you to be the one driving the conversation and making the decisions.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's move to the questions in the chat box. Mantha, she's here with us, and she's asking, should the disability be physical to request for accommodations? What if the student has social communication disorder? Can they request for accommodation? And she's asking another question, what accommodations can be requested for neurodiverse students?
Okay. So I love this question, because I know people, when we hear disability, we kind of automatically sometimes go to physical disability, right? But it's not the case. We work with any disability or diagnosis that you can think of. So it could be physical disability, it could be psychological or mental health, it could be learning disabilities, it could be autism spectrum, it could be chronic health conditions. Pretty much anything you can think of, we're going to work with that. And one thing to know too, is that we may ask about a diagnosis, but we really, and I'll just speak for Colorado State, we know sometimes, like we work with students who are going to a doctor and they're experiencing some medical related barriers, but they don't know what the actual name of it is. They don't know what the diagnosis is. And so that's why we talk to you about what are the barriers that you're experiencing right now, because we're not going to worry so much about your diagnosis. We're just going to worry about what are the barriers you're experiencing related to some of the health things that are going on to ensure that we have the proper accommodation. And so in terms of different, as I spoke about earlier, it's hard to say, okay, I'm neurodiverse, here are the list of accommodations. We're going to tailor it specifically to you. But some common ones would typically be that I can think of as extended time on exams and quizzes. I know sometimes there might be some anxiety in terms of lots of people in the room. So we might have a smaller room environment, or maybe there's anxiety with living with a roommate or having a community style bathroom. So we might offer you a private room in your residence hall, or a suite style bathroom or something like that. So those are some things I can think of. Lots of times I also think about with neurodiverse students is kind of sometimes not always just accommodations, but it's connecting to other resources on campus to provide more one-on-one support to understand the college experience and to have more study skills and social cues and things like that. And so it's just kind of, we want you to tell your story when you come to your college or university with that accommodation specialist, because they're going to tailor it to you and what the barriers that you experience and what you might need.
The last question we have from Hala, does the syllabus of the college, is it modified to meet the needs of those who have autism, for example, or do you have such students in your campus?
So let me ask a clarifying question. So the syllabus of the college is not, so in terms of like the requirements of a class, or are we talking about how it's formatted, or?
So here, well, I'm going to talk about schools here in Qatar. So for example, there are special students with special needs. So the curriculum is modified to meet their, their needs. Okay, so they're not like any other student, so they modify the syllabus. Is that also doable for college? What do you think?
I got you now. So that's kind of the reason for accommodations. Okay, so when you work with the Disability Services Office, we're going to come up with accommodations that allows you to participate and complete the coursework that your non-disabled peers are doing. So what might be different, so like for example, here in the States, in our kindergarten through 12th grade system, they may have different ways to modify the assignments or curriculum to for a student to complete that coursework. In college, it's different. So like for example, in high school here in the States, there may have been a student who says like, if they have 4 multiple choice question answers for a question, that maybe this instructor could remove one of those and only have to choose from 3. When it comes to college, that kind of a modification doesn't apply. What they're going to say is that we still have these same 4 options, but we're going to maybe give you more time to try to think that one through to figure out what that might be. So whatever assignments or tests or things that your instructor is doing for the class, you're going to have to participate in the same way. But what we're looking at for accommodations is, okay, do we need to provide you extra time on that test? Or do we need to provide you extra time on that assignment? Do we need to provide you technology in order to complete that assignment, but you're still going to complete the same assignment as everybody else?
Thank you very much, Steve. So now I'm going to close our public diplomacy officer at the U.S. Embassy Doha. Steve Gion is going to give the closing remarks. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for participating in tonight's very important presentation on tips and resources for students with disabilities studying in America. And I want to thank our presenter, John Dove from the Colorado State University, for providing such a wealth of information. And it is our hope that this has dispelled some myths and allayed some fears of prospective students and their parents in their students going to the United States to study. This presentation has been recorded, so if you joined us late or you'd like to review some of the information again or recommend it for your friends to view, it will be reposted at the Education USA website, as well as the U.S. Embassy's social media sites on the U.S. Embassy Doha, Qatar, as well as Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia. This concludes tonight's presentation on tips and resources for students with disabilities, and it is our sincere hope that you will have fun, meaningful, and fruitful educational experience in the United States. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.